A man and his wife were doing some home renovations when they uncovered a secret. But it wasn't just any secret. It was something truly horrifying that ended up connecting to one of the biggest mysteries of all time. They couldn't have guessed what kind of trouble they'd soon find themselves in, but it would all begin with some construction work. What had started out as a fun project for this married couple quickly turned into something they wished they had never stumbled upon. They had decided to renovate the living quarters above the garage, specifically their daughter's room. The girl was off at college, so they had plenty of time to work on the space without bothering her, but he was finally nearing completion. As he removed old paneling, he noticed a section of the wall that looked a little different than the rest. She agreed, but she didn't think it was anything to worry about. She told him it probably didn't mean anything, but then he felt something strange through the wall. The noise echoed throughout the house. Their dog could hear it too and started barking frantically from somewhere inside the house. However, the dad would soon be wishing he had more helpers. There was also a door at the far end of the room that they had not noticed before. He called an old friend who was skilled in construction. It was like walking into an icebox. It seemed like a place where someone might do unspeakable things. But what exactly was going on? It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. They didn't know what to do. They could hear their dog barking loudly from below. He shone his light on them and realized they were human bones. He told her to stay put while he went to investigate. He grabbed a flashlight and slowly descended the stairs. They tried to get through to an electrician, but nobody answered, so the dad decided to do it himself. The sight of it made them sick to their stomachs. They also brought in a team of forensic experts to examine the rest of the house. The friend came over and listened closely before telling them he thought it might be a hidden room, or perhaps a safe. Who could have done such a thing and why? And most importantly, where was the killer now? The previous owner had disappeared and no one knew where he had gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. This was no easy feat. It took a lot longer than expected to get everything how he wanted it. One of them had been reported missing just 2 years prior to the discovery, while the other two had vanished decades ago. But each new owner had eventually sold it because they couldn't stand the creepy vibes. The basement was clearly quite old, judging by the state of the bones. He asked his wife to come over and take a look. Most of the owners had reported hearing strange noises and seeing shadowy figures moving around the house. He told his wife what he had seen and they decided to call the police. The police were stumped. They had no leads and no witnesses. It almost felt like there was a void behind it. It sounded crazy, but the dad couldn't help but wonder if there really was a secret room behind that wall. The expert carefully examined it and found that it had been made recently. He used a hammer and chisel to start chipping away at the wall. They found old photos of the previous owner. It was torn and faded, but it did have some writing on it. But why, and what had happened to the owner of the house? It took hours, but eventually they were able to make out the words. They were afraid that the killer would target them next. In the hidden room, there was a small hole in the corner. It was filled with disturbing drawings and writings. As they continued chipping away at the wall, it became clear that there was indeed a hollow space behind it. He had been planning to harm them, but he hadn't acted on his urges until now. He had stalked her and her friends, taking photos of them without their knowledge. It was clear that these people had been tortured before they died. Finally, they were able to pry open the wall just enough to fit a flashlight through it. What they saw on the other side shocked them. It was a small room filled with all sorts of strange things. But it didn't stop there. But he hadn't been able to hide the smell of death forever. But what was behind this second door? As they stepped into the room, they could feel the temperature drop several degrees. To this day, no one knows what really happened in that house. But one thing is certain, it was a place where evil never died. People in the neighborhood reported hearing strange noises and seeing shadows moving around the empty lot. He was living under a false identity in another state, but the jig was up. They found all sorts of unsettling things in here, like old children's shoes, a rocking horse, and even a music box. But the haunting had followed him, and he had been unable to escape it. And then they noticed something else. There was blood all over the floor. And then they noticed something else. There was a set of stairs leading down into darkness. He had been driven insane by the haunting, and had lashed out at the women. The dad knew he had to be brave for his wife's sake. He couldn't see anything in the darkness, but then he started to make out some shapes. He quickly backed away and ran back upstairs. The officers arrived and were shocked by what they found. They had never seen anything like it before. They carefully collected the remains and sent them to the lab for testing. They found more bones in the hidden room, including a skull. The police were able to determine that the bones belonged to 3 young women. They had been missing for many years. The police were puzzled. To make matters worse, The house had been foreclosed on during the economic downturn of 2008. The police searched the house from top to bottom, but they found no trace of the previous owner or any other clues. The only lead they had was the house itself. It had been built in 1947 and had changed hands many times. No one had ever lived in the house for more than 5 years without going insane. It was clear that this house was hiding something dark and sinister, and now the police had to uncover the truth. They started by interviewing everyone who had lived in the house since it was built, but none of them had any useful information. They all agreed that the house was haunted, but they couldn't prove it. Just when they were about to give up hope, one of the forensic experts found something. It was barely noticeable, but it was there. It was clear that someone had been hiding in the room. The police searched the area around the hole and found a small piece of paper. The police brought in a handwriting expert to try and decipher the writing. They read, "I am sorry." It was signed with a name that the police recognized. It was the name of the previous owner. But why would he apologize? And what was he apologizing for? The police searched the house again, looking for anything that could help them understand what had happened here. He was a successful businessman, well known in the community. He had no criminal record and no enemies. Why would anyone want to hurt him? The police were baffled. They had no answers. And now time was running out. The remains of the 3 women had been identified, but their families didn't want to come forward. The police knew they had to act fast. They needed to catch the killer before he struck again. They went back to the house and searched the hidden room. They found a small wooden box in the corner. It was locked, but the police had a key. When they opened it, they found a diary. The diary belonged to the previous owner. He had written about his obsession with one of the women. He had even broken into their homes and stolen their personal belongings. The police finally understood what had happened. The previous owner had killed the 3 women and then hidden their bodies in the basement. He had buried the evidence and tried to make it look like the women had simply vanished. The police were able to track down the previous owner. He was arrested and taken back to the house where he confessed to the crimes. He had killed them in a frenzy and then hid their bodies in the basement. The house was demolished and the land was cleared, but the haunting still remained. Some even claimed to have seen the ghost of the previous owner wandering the streets at night.